Good day. Welcome to another edition of Ebima Mungo's Perspective on Global Affairs. Before I continue, I urge you to please press the like button. And if you're new to my show, I also urge you to subscribe. In June of 2013, there were some revelations published by the Washington Post. The Washington Post reported on leaks by a contractor for the National Security Agency called Edward Snowden. Edward Snowden said the United States agency was spying on Americans. The NSA is an agency that has extensive capacity to infiltrate electronic systems. But that remit to infiltrate is supposed to be for foreign adversaries of America, not on Americans. But Edward Snowden said that they were spying on Americans. Beyond that, also, Edward Snowden also revealed one very big shocker. He said the United States government was spying on its allies. He even mentioned the fact that they were spying on Angela Merkel. They had hacked her phone and they were listening to all her conversations with whoever she was talking to. Anyway, we got to know that these agencies have extensive power to spy. In fact, the British also have theirs. I forget the acronym of it, but it is GHQ something. They also have this ability to spy into the phones and electronic messages of adversaries. Another person who became a victim of being spied on was Michael Flynn in 2017. He was then the national security advisor of President Trump. And it was revealed that he had talked to the Russians. And for talking to the Russians, he was said to have broken the law somehow. There were some improprieties he may have committed, and eventually he was forced to resign. Now we got to hear something in this modern age and time that President Trump is trying to push for peace. We got to learn about a transcript from a call between Steve Witkoff, President Trump's envoy, and Huliapole, President Putin's foreign lead in his office, in his administration. He's not the foreign secretary, but he plays a role as the presidential aide on foreign affairs in President Putin's office. This transcript was released by Bloomberg, and it showed that obviously Bloomberg had gotten that transcript from people who had spied on President on the call between these two parties. This was what was reported. This is how the headline of it was reported. Witkoff advised Russia on how to pitch Ukraine plan to Trump. Yes, it was said that he was giving extensive coaching to the Russians on how to talk to Trump. He called Yuri Ushakov, and they had this long conversation on how to prep a call between Putin and Trump. Anyway, President Trump dismissed this. He said it is a very important part of diplomacy and negotiations, that Steve Witkoff was only doing what he was supposed to be doing because he has an agenda, and that agenda is that he wants peace between the both parties. So he has to reach out to both parties. That's how President Trump was very dismissive of it. He didn't feel it was anything. We should remember that President Trump has known that leak of information to the press is a very integral part of the ploy of the deep state. But it came to be known now that somebody is hacking Steve Witkoff's phone and listening in on to everything that he has been doing regarding this peace process. So the big question now is who is listening? Who did this? Whose interest is served? The talk about who may have leaked this information has become one that is being discussed now. May it have been the Ukrainians? They have an interest, a very clear interest, an intent to destabilize the Russians. But do they have the capacity? May it have been the British? They have the capacity, and they also have an interest in making sure that this peace process does not take place. Whatever, whoever it is, though, the Guardian, some analysts now feel that it is the Europeans. It must be an European agency that is doing it. In the Guardian reported that they leaked, who leaked Witkoff call advising Kremlin on how to get this Trump. This is a big discussion now, but it now feels like it is the Europeans, and that's where it is pointing to. Nevertheless, it could also be the deep state. We know about the deep state in America here. The deep state has agents from the CIA, the NSA, it has agents, people who have been entrenched in the system in Washington there and who, to a large extent, want this war to continue. The victim of the 2017 leak, General Mike Flynn, put out a tweet. He was responding to a tweet by Glenn Greenwood, who is eavesdropping on Steve Witkoff's call with Russian officials to end the war in Ukraine, then linking them to Bloomberg. That's what Glenn Greenwood had written. And then General Mike Flynn said the determination of this leak, if it was inside the United States intelligence system, could be done in very short order. Those desiring perpetual war with Russia seeks only to benefit themselves. The day we can fully trust each other is the day we can achieve peace on earth. Let's find these leakers, past and present, while simultaneously restoring trust between great nations, and let's fight as harder for peace as those who want to perpetuate this idiotic war. Obviously, Michael Flynn is in the very other side of the ledger, that side of the ledger that wants the war not to continue, he wants peace. I can tell you one thing, in the western part of the world, that's America and the Western Europe, the people who want peace and who want an end to this war are few and far in between. You may find a lot of them in the Republican Party, though, but definitely most everybody in the Democratic Party wants this war to continue. So whose interest is being served here now? The Europeans want this war to continue, no doubt about it. For whatever reasons, each country has its own peculiar interest that they're trying to pursue. The Baltic states have their own interests. They're very wary of the big neighbor they have. The British have their own interests. It may have to do with the sense that they were once a geopolitical power, they were once a big empire, and they still tend to feel that they can meddle in geopolitical happenings around the world. The French too also have. The Germans too have this desire. The Poles, the Eastern Europeans to a large extent all have an interest in this war continuing because somehow they believe that this war will bleed out the Russians, or if for nothing else, it will give those who want the war to continue enough time for them to rebuild. So there's no shortage of people who will undermine the peace process. But as Europe continues to try to undermine this peace process, there's a new reality in American political space, and his name is Dan Driscoll, U.S. Secretary for the Army. Dan Driscoll is of the J.D. Vance strand of politics. They were classmates in law school. And he tends to believe, he may not have said it, but he tends to believe that this war is a losing proposition, and he is advising the Europeans to do the best they can to support President Trump's peace process. New York Times reported that the U.S. Army Secretary Dan Driscoll strongly urged European officials to support President Trump's peace process, despite deep concerns that the plan favors Moscow. I can tell you that plan doesn't favor Moscow. If it's taken to the Russians, or if it had been taken to the Russians first, it would have been rejected by the Russians. There are a lot of points in the 28-point plan that will not sit well with the Russians. Anyway, the New York Times reports that in Geneva, Driscoll called on EU and NATO colleagues to act faster, emphasizing that Washington expects progress. He also said that Russia is significantly increasing missile production and creating stockpiles capable of changing the course of the war and the security situation in Europe. It is very important that they heed or see what is going on. But it is, Driscoll is just talking to himself as far as I'm concerned, or as far as Zelensky is concerned. Zelensky, we should point out, and the Russian negotiating team have already rejected 3 critical parts of that 28-point peace plan. One, that part that has to do with the reduction of the size of the Ukrainian army to 800,000 or 600,000. They don't feel they can do that. The other part also is the stickiest part for them is the concession of territory to the Russians. Donbass, which is Luhansk and Donetsk, Zaporizhia and Kherson. Somehow, maybe they think they will get their hands back on all the territories that the Russians have already taken in Kharkiv, in Sumy, in Dnipropetrovsk. The Russians are taking more territories as if like they are banking it, keeping it in store for further negotiations in the future. And the Atlantic, very pro-Ukraine, very, very pro-Ukraine. They say that Zelensky refuses to cede, and for this, there's now an impasse in the peace process. We already know that. We know that. And it is for this reason why, with all this back and forth, agreeing and not agreeing, Politico has reported that the Americans are saying there will be no security guarantees until after a peace deal has been signed. Already we know, it was my video yesterday that Zelensky had hoped to go and meet Trump this week, but Trump has said no deal or no meetings until there's a deal. They're very far off from a deal, I can tell you that. One of the big sticking points also, one of the 3 major no-nos for the Ukrainians in that 28-point peace plan was that they will not form an alliance, join an alliance, and there will be a neutral country. In effect, there will be a neutral country. They don't think anybody has that right to tell them not to join NATO. That is one of the points that has created the impasse by Zelensky. So what did we have today? No less a person than the NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte, former Prime Minister of Netherlands, says Moscow has no veto on Ukraine's NATO accession. In short, Russia cannot have a say. We should remember that in the 4 years of this particular war, because this war is actually going to on 4 years now, by February 24th, it will be 4 years since the special military operation started. And one refrain has been very clear to the Russians: no further NATO expansion towards the east, none to Ukraine, none to Georgia, and none to Moldova. They had stated this long ago. It was something stated at the Munich Security Council meeting in 2007, restated in 2008. Georgia, Ukraine, and Moldova were red lines for the Russians. They stated it long ago, and that they will go to war. They went to war, and they are in a war now. As far as this war is concerned, one person believes that this war is going very nice and very smoothly for the Russians. Yesterday, we saw how Zelensky denied that the narrative being put out by the Russians that they are winning this war, and the people who want Ukraine to stop this war, that the Russians are winning this war, that it's a lie, that the Ukrainian warriors, the Ukrainian soldiers are dealing significant harm and significant losses on the Russians. Zelensky put out that tweet yesterday. I posted it. I still have it there somewhere. Well, President Putin is in the CSTO, or he was in the CSTO Organization Treaty meeting in Bishkek, Kyrgyzstan. And he believes the war is going on very well for the Russians. Yes, he says that the conflict will end when Ukrainian troops withdraw from the territories, which is what they have always been saying. He believes that this conflict will not end until Ukraine leaves the Donbass, either that or they will take that territory forcefully. He says Ukraine has lost 47,000 soldiers on the battlefield in October alone. The pace of Russian troops advancement in combat zone is increasing. Russian troops showing positive dynamics remains at the front areas. Putin said that mobilization of people in Ukraine is forced because many Ukrainians don't want to fight this war anymore. In fact, we know that 75% from a Gallup poll, 72 to 75% of Ukrainians want this war to end. We have a lot of videos of people being forced to be conscripted. And then he said there's a growing gap between the losses that the Ukrainians suffer and their ability to send people to the battlefield. He also stated that the desertion rate of Ukraine is very high. For those who have been following this war or this special military operation, whichever one you want to call it, if you're Ukrainian, it's a war of aggression. If you're Russian, it's a special military operation. You will know that to a large extent what the Russian president is saying seems to corroborate what a lot of analysts are saying. Let's listen to Putin making these statements.
Had improvements. Our army is moving forward faster. But the key problem for the enemy is that they have a growing gap between their losses and the number of soldiers that they can replace. I think they had 47.5 thousand lost in October, and they forcefully mobilized about 16.5 thousand.
Anyway, President Putin also used the opportunity to remind the members of the CSTO. Most of the members of the CSTO were Central Asian countries. They were part of the Soviet Union. They still keep and are committed to being under the orbit and the security infrastructure of the Russians. So the Russians, President Putin became a salesman for Russian weaponry and told them how Russian weapons have demonstrated their effectiveness in real combat operations, and Moscow is ready to share this technology with allies in the Collective Security Treaty Organization. He wants them to buy Russian drones, Russian Iskander missiles, maybe even Kinjal missiles if they have a way of deploying it. But what he's just saying is that they should buy Russian armament. Russia we should know, is I think the third or second largest exporter of arms, but they used to export to some countries that are not within their orbit anymore. So they are expanding their markets. Russia is not just expanding its ability to sell oil and gas. They are selling, they are also expanding their ability to sell wheat, agricultural products, traditional products that they always had, uranium, and also their expertise in building of power plants, especially nuclear power plants. They are just putting themselves out there. Any product they have a capacity and a comparative advantage with, they are putting out there and they are selling. And in this particular case here, they have war-proven weaponry that they are now selling to the CSTO members. Already they are integrated, so it will not be a hard thing for them to be buying this equipment, but it may be hard for them. Some of those countries are not as rich as Kazakhstan. Kazakhstan is one of the poorest of those countries there. But nevertheless, these days, we know that some of them fall within the orbit of Turkey, and they're also buying Turkish equipment. So he's trying to put them to see that they should buy more Russian equipment, especially their drones. Turkey has cornered all that drone market there now. So they can make a statement for their drones. We see the Guarantee drones, we see what the Guarantee and Guarantee drones, and then we see also what the Lancet drones and all the FPV drones. Russia has stepped up that capacity and they have used them, and they may teach the members of that security organization how to use them. Another thing too that Putin talked about was this Russian assets that is frozen that the Europeans are very intent on taking, stealing, as he calls it. He calls it that any attempt to take it, use it forcefully, will be stealing. And he promised that he will retaliate. We should remember that the Western countries have a lot of investments in Russia. Russia was a very big captive market for the West. It's just an unfortunate thing that they chose the sanctions and they lost many of these investments that they left by choice. But those assets are still there. They have laws, international laws of property rights protection, and they are protected. But if the Russian assets and Russia that are already frozen are given to Ukraine, he will take retaliatory measures against them. Putin said on Thursday that his government is drafting reciprocal measures in case the EU decides to use the cash value of frozen Russian assets to finance a 140 billion reparation loan for Ukraine. The government of Russian Federation, by my assignment, develops a package of reciprocal measures in case this happens, he told journalists. One of the things, though, that Putin said in this thing is that he believes strongly in, he believes that it was diplomatic regarding Trump's peace plan. He says it's a good framework to start to discuss about the peace. But we know that there are so many sticking points in that peace plan that he will not agree to. And as he's talking about the attempt to, the desire that he will have to put reciprocal actions against them, one of the things he pushed back against is he's not interested in going back to the G7. Neither is he also interested in going to opening up or going back to having good business relationship with the West. Russia has pivoted towards the East, towards Africa, and towards Latin America. And even though those markets are not as big as that of Western Europe, there are still markets that are being developed. The good thing is that next year, he will deepen his relationship with the CSTO members because next year, Russia will be assuming the chairmanship of the CSTO. One of the consequences of this war has been several rounds of sanctions against Russia by the Europeans. We know that already. They left the Russian market. But those rounds of sanctions have started to take a lot of effect on a lot of countries. The bigger countries are able to cope, but the smaller countries it's now beginning to tell on them. Of course, Ukraine is the most damaged. Ukraine is having shortfalls in our budget, but even the Baltic countries, we've come to find out, are in dire straits. We know Germany is being deindustrialized, and Ukraine has been depopulated to a large extent. The economic effect of these sanctions on Russia seems to have been terribly hard on more European countries than on Russia itself. Russia has become self-sufficient in a lot of things they used to buy from the West. And some of the countries that are most impacted are the Baltic countries now, because prior to this relationship, bad as it was, they had trade with the Russians, most notably tourism, and they could get into Russia and two-way trade. Their borders were open. Even when they were looking west, they chose to join the European Union and join NATO. They still had extensive trade, but with these sanctions, they've stopped that trade and it has now started to have big effect on their economy. And to that extent, they have now gone to go and meet the European Union to plead and beg for support. So the European Union is now about to give support um, to the Latvians and to the Estonians and to the Lithuanians. I have a report here that says that the European Commission will finance the Baltic countries that suffered losses due to anti-Russian sanctions. As a result of the introduction of 19 sanctions package against Russia, Finland, Estonia, and Latvia and Lithuania were affected. The region was especially hard hit due to the decline in tourism and investment, as well as the collapse of cross-border trade. The situation was worsened by the rapid rise of inflation after the pandemic. I should also add that one of the things that these countries did is that they started to cut themselves off the electricity supply from Russia. Yes, they celebrated how they're now getting electricity from Western Europe. I should add that's much more costlier electricity. And even in the midst of all of this, Latvia is even considering to uproot its train lines that used to connect to Russia. There is a whole sense of unreason within that neighborhood that is quite shocking. Latvian media is reporting that Riga is actively debating tearing up the railway lines to Russia and Belarus. The president says that the government must assess the consequences by the year end. Some hawks claim that removing Soviet gauge track is essential for security. I think one of those countries who have already done that, they've changed their rail system as well as changing their electricity supply. But it doesn't hide the fact that they're in big economic dire strait. The way I read it now is that when the Baltics, we should remember, is where some of the most hawkish of all the policymakers in Europe, the name that comes to mind, everybody, if you wake any analyst up, the first name that'll come to mind is Kaja Kallas. She is from Estonia. Alexander Stubb has thrown himself into the party. He is the president of Finland. And even the Latvian president and prime minister, all of them, they are all in this anti-Russia coalition, not to talk about the Poland and all. So that's the situation now. They are having economic dire straits because of these actions. Now they are joining all the other parties, Germany, France, and Britain, who have already been suffering the blowback, but are being brave about it. Let's go to the battle situation now and let's see how the Russians are doing roaringly well in Kharkiv. The Russian army is advancing in the operational space of Kharkiv region after breaking through the Ukrainian army forces in Volchansk. They have taken a large part of Volchansk. Volchansk is almost fully in Russian hands. Now we should remember that Volchansk has been a conflict zone for over 2 years now. The Russians were thoroughly contained. The Ukrainians put up a big fight, a very solid fight, and they were containing the Russians until it was even because of the Volchansk operation and in trying to create relief for that Volchansk incursion that they went into Kursk. You can even argue that that's why they went into Kursk through that Sumy region, and it was a big disaster. That Kursk operation cost them a lot of logistics and a lot of material and a lot of personnel and people. It was a bad investment, ultimately military investment, and military strategists feel that it wasn't a necessary move because they used up some of their best resources in that particular move. Another place too that has been a big surprise to many is the Huliapole sector. It seems like the Russians are fleeing away from, the Ukrainians are fleeing from Huliapole. They are running away to the extent where it seems like there are big pockets and the Russians are moving on. Russian 127th Division advanced towards Huliapole as armed forces of Ukraine defense collapse. Wide push into Haicho and Yancho. They are moving into the Dnipropetrovsk also. So we see this. Another sector too that they are doing so well is in Novopalivka. This is from Riba. Riba says that Russian troops control most of Novopalivka after armored breakthrough. Armed forces of Ukraine reinforcement failed to stop advance, fighting now in south and center of the village. Yeah, the Russians are moving. I will, I will leave the deep dive to the channels um, in YouTube, Telegram, and X that really do give very, very solid updates on this. Let me go to Trump now. Trump has been in the news for a while now, but he's in the holiday mood. But nevertheless, he has been in the news. And the first news I want to talk about Trump is from Africa. President Trump is a very good friend of Israel. And all the countries that have stood against Israel, and even individuals that have stood up against Israel, President Trump take a personal fight with them. He may couch it in whatever name and form and manner he wants to, but it is his support for Israel. That is now causing fractures within his MAGA base. But nevertheless, he picked a fight with South Africa. From the very get-go, he said that South Africans are killing the Africans and that because of that, he wasn't going to go to the G20. But he didn't end there. He also decided that he's not going to invite the South Africans to the G20 that will be hosted in America next year. He put out this tweet and it was quite an interesting one. He says the United States did not attend the G20 in South Africa because the South African government refuses to acknowledge or address the horrific human rights abuses endured by Africans and other descendants of Dutch, French, and German settlers. To put it more bluntly, they are killing white people and randomly allowing their farms to be taken from them. Perhaps worst of all, the soon to be out of business New York Times and the fake news media won't issue a word against the genocide. That's why all the liars and pretenders of radical left media are going out of business. At the conclusion of the G20, South Africa refused to hand over the G20 presidency to a senior representative from our US embassy who attended the closing ceremony. Therefore, at my direction, South Africa would not be receiving an invitation to the 2026 G20, which will be hosted in the great city of Miami, Florida next year. South Africa has demonstrated to the world they are not a country worthy of membership anywhere, and we are going to stop all payments and subsidies to them effective immediately. Thank you for your attention to this matter. South Africa has been having a very rough time with the Trump presidency, no doubt. Trump is very loyal to his friends. He will say that he has to conjecture and bring out a lot of things. One country that will be benefiting from South Africa's loss will be Poland. We hear the CNN was reporting that Trump plans to invite Poland to participate. Another country too that President Trump finally had a call. He called Xi Jinping. This happened a few days ago. He called President Xi Jinping and he talked about it. That call led to an invitation to visit China, and it led to an invitation to visit China by President Xi Jinping. But there was something now we've come to learn that came out of that call. I would just want to read out the message he put regarding that particular call. I just had a very good telephone call with President Xi of China. We discussed many topics, including Ukraine, Russia, fentanyl, soybeans, and other farm products. We have done a good and very important deal for our great farmers, and it will only get better. Our relationship with China is extremely strong. This call was a follow-up to our highly successful meeting in South Korea 3 weeks ago. Since then, there has been significant progress on both sides and keeping our agreements current and accurate. Now we can set our sights on the big picture. To that end, President Xi invited me to Beijing in April, which I accepted, and I reciprocated where he will be my guest for a state visit in the US later in the year. We agreed that it is important that we communicate often, which I look forward to doing. Thank you for your attention to this matter. That call produced one very, very visible outcome that really changed geopolitics. One, we know that China and Japan have been having a lot of problems recently because the Prime Minister Sana Takaichi said that if China attacks Taiwan, Japan will look at it as an existential threat. And that simply means they'll take military action against China. China has been doing everything to put the prime minister to make her to pull back or roll back that statement, but she has refused. But we got to learn that Trump, after the call with Xi Jinping, told Japan to lower the volume on Taiwan. Xi spent half an hour on the call hammering Trump about Taiwan, furious over the Japanese Prime Minister Senator Takaichi's recent comments suggesting Japan could join a military response if China attacked. So anyway, Takaichi went to Congress and said that she was going to generally made statements that tended to roll back. What she used, the excuse she used was that it's international law. China and Taiwan are one country by international law, and she and her country would abide by international law. She slowly stepped back, but it hasn't reduced. China, one of the main things that came out of this is that the Chinese stopped their citizens from going to continue their education in Japan. They encouraged them not to continue to go to Japan for education, but they also encouraged them to stop to visit Japan. 23 million Chinese, as I gather, I think it may not be that much. I don't think it to be that much, but they have a lot of visitors to Japan. I think 23 million people visit Japan regularly, and the Chinese make up a big amount of them. The Chinese have stopped visiting. Rather, what has happened is that the Chinese have pivoted. The South China Morning Post is reporting that the Chinese have pivoted to now which country? Russia. They have pivoted to Russia. So now a lot of Japanese businesses have lost businesses that Russians are going to be gaining now. Chinese travel firms have seen a surge in Russia-related booking in recent weeks. I have that report here. And as China's tourists scrap plans to visit Japan en masse amid ongoing diplomatic feud, many appear to be pivoting to an alternative destination, Russia. Chinese travel firms have reported a surge in Russia-related flights and hotel bookings in recent weeks. It's politics just reshapes and rejigs economies, as we are seeing. The ties between China and Russia has now benefited from some other quarrel in the east there between Japan and China. So the Chinese and the Russians are consolidating their people-to-people interaction, which is what Xi Jinping really likes to call it, people-to-people interaction. He loves that word a lot. And it is extending and improving the relationship. No doubt about it. The economic relationship between China and Russia will be much more than the $250 billion it was last year. It will be a few tad more. One thing too I should point out is that Xi Jinping had already created a visa-free situation for the Russians. So provinces like Hainan and all the border provinces of China and Russia have extensive borders, which you remember, an extensive relationship. So those border provinces have seen an upsurge of of Russian visitors, even before now, well over a long time ago. I think that statement to create a visa free was done after the September 3rd visit by Putin to China and Beijing to participate in that parade. The parade, ironically, the parade of 80 years after the aggression of Japan against China. A victory over Japanese aggression over against China. Anyway, this is where I end my show for today. If you're new to my channel, please subscribe. If you have any views regarding the opinions I just expressed, please put them in the comment section. Do well to like and share. Until my next video, you have a good day.